Hello, users, and welcome to another episode of Above It All, your favorite show for your favorite fucking shit. So, I got really drunk last night, and I'm still kind of drunk this morning, so I want that to be explicitly clear. Thank you. So anyway, the Black Lives Matter protests have not led to a spike in coronavirus cases report. It should be says like report says or a study shows or but it just says report. That's I disagree with that syntax. But this is actually pretty interesting. So I'm just going to read basically the entire article cuz it is pretty interesting. Following weeks, and there's also more I want to talk about in related to how they gathered this information. Following weeks of speculation as to whether or not Black Lives Matter protests across the states would lead to an uptick in coronavirus infections, a study using data from the country's largest cities found no evidence that the demonstrations caused a spike in the number of new COVID-19 cases. In a paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, several authors analyzed the effects of major Black Lives Matter protests Black Lives Matter protests had on city populations and found that the amount of new cases was offset by individuals who elected not to march and opted to continue social distancing. The study was conducted by observing 315 major U.S. cities. Protests took place in 281 of them and did not occur in the other 34. Protests were also differentiated by how long demonstrations lasted, as well as if any violent activities occurred at the time. I wonder how they're defining violence. Like, is fucking spray painting a building violence? Because, I don't know, in some people's eyes it is, because they're fucking freak shows. We find no evidence that urban protests reignited COVID-19 case growth during the more than 2.5 weeks following protest onset. The researchers write, "We conclude that the predictions of broad negative public health consequences of Black Lives Matter protests were far too narrowly conceived. Using anonymously reported smartphone data collected by SafeGraph, the researchers were able to analyze the movement of 45 million individuals during protests. Confirmed case data was sourced from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Reminder, if you can help it, if you're not actively using your cell phone, setting it in airplane mode or turning it off or not bringing it are things that you should highly consider doing. You do not want to be tracked if you're going to do anything that, them tracking your phone would potentially, you don't want to be tracked. Just don't be safe. That's really fucking weird. It's creepy, and obviously this is going to be happening, and obviously they're doing this, of course. I mean, look at the surveillance state. But again, this is why you should always use airplane mode, or turn it off, or put it in some sort of like Faraday cage of some sort. That if you can get like a little bag of some kind, that's going to be very important. The data is intended to observe how protesters may have practiced social distancing or how close they came into contact with other people. The social distancing analysis lasted for 30 days before and after the protest to gauge the case growth. I'm drunk a little bit, so please, my reading ain't the greatest. Analyses reveal a few key findings, namely that researchers found no evidence that stay-at-home behaviors were different in counties which had protests and counties which did not have protests. Researchers also saw an increase in stay-at-home trends in the counties closest to the city, or where protests were headquartered. Following the protests, social distancing behavior increased. In conjunction with relatively linear coronavirus case growth, the findings suggest that any direct decrease in social distancing among the subset of the population participating in the protests is more than offset by the increasing social distancing behavior among others. Put differently, more people stayed home during protests, which balance out any new cases contracted by demonstrators. Community transmission was not a major factor associated with Black Lives Matter protests. One more article, I know this is laborious. While it is possible that the protests caused an increase in the spread of COVID-19 among those who attended the protests, we demonstrate that the protests had little effect on the spread of COVID-19 for the entire population of these counties, with protests during the more than 3 weeks following protest onset. In most cases, the estimated longer-run effect post-21 days was negative, though not statistically distinguishable from zero, the authors wrote. So, when George Floyd was murdered, that weekend, there was a protest demonstration in my town. I live in a rural town in North Carolina. It's not, super rural, but, it's got a city center, but for the most part, there's not that many people here. And I remember there was a protest in my town that I went to. And before and after the protest was entirely peaceful, but before, for whatever reason, white people are just going to be white people. There's people in my family that start having a meltdown, thinking that, rioters are going to break into their house and steal everything in the house, and that, the end of the world is coming. Keep in mind, these are the same kind of people who don't believe in coronavirus. And this is, we went to the grocery store. The relatively sane people went to the grocery store, and the grocery stores were closed early at 5 p.m., and they were boarding up the windows at the grocery store. And then, the context is I went to this protest, and it was just 150, 200 people in this small town talking about how cops are bad. And then everyone went home. It was one of the liberal, normal protest things. But the rest of the city literally felt that, the outside agitator white anarchists are going to run wreak havoc. Keep in mind, these are the same stores that would never close for COVID. These are the same, there was no curfew for COVID, but you're going to do it over the imaginary threat of violence. And that's the problem with pretending that these protests are violent, is that it causes everyone else to freak out. But the good angle of that is that everyone else stays home. Because the white people think that black people are going to loot them and kill them all or something, because they're stupid. They're dumb. White people are stupid, dude. I live in a white family, and I can assure you, white people are dumb as hell. And again, I just wanted to share that little thing. But yeah, the protests, surprisingly, are not creating any sort of, big spike in the general population. Now, obviously, you got to be safe if you go to a protest, because, the one thing as well is that masks are aplenty at these protests. Whereas if you went to the right-wing goon squad ones, those masks are non-existent. If you look at Tulsa, the Trump Tulsa rally, no masks to be seen. And these things are important to analyze. Anyway, thank you for watching, and you have a good rest of your day.